You go from a perspective of protecting your borders and protecting your sovereignty into perhaps going across that Rubicon and doing things that have, in many respects, created the BRICS, or at least the rallying cry that supports it, and the de-dollarization that the United States and their hegemony, perhaps from their perspective, that we are the destabilizing force, not the force for good coming from a moral high ground that you could argue we've kind of trampled upon. And I was listening to Gerald Celente about this the other night. And again, I think the key, Jay, is to listen and to if you never listen to other viewpoints, if you never broaden your mind in terms of listening to both sides of an argument, you never grow. And I like what Gerald had to say. He said, look, can you only imagine? Now, granted, Maduro, a narco kingpin, maybe not in a duly elected president, but you could say really kind of the same thing about Zelensky not being duly elected, and he closed down the election or the voting and election process during time of war. So he's not the duly elected president, or shouldn't be. And yet, can you imagine if Putin came in and took he and his wife and brought them back for whatever their reasons are, or she did the same thing in Taiwan? Oh my God, the outrage. And it was interesting, he said, look, listen to what George Washington said at his farewell address, that is, stay out of foreign entanglements. And I don't like being the world's policeman. I think it's a problem. And when you start to go further than that and threaten countries like Mexico and threaten countries like Cuba and start bombing in Iran, start bombing in Nigeria, you're bombing in Syria. At what point does this begin to have effects on the way that the world looks at the United States, the way that the world looks at the U.S. Treasury market, the way that the world looks at the dollar? And I think we're crossing that line, or already have, to where it is something that I think is perhaps destabilizing. And you can say all you want about the fact that he was bringing drugs, or supposedly bringing drugs, into the country. But in essence, we went and we kidnapped a sitting president, right, wrong, or indifferent. And I think that's something that, I think will have ramifications. And all of these countries who are resource rich and maybe emerging nations, underdeveloped in South America, are starting to think very hard about, their allegiance to the BRICS nations or their allegiance to the United States. Do they want to sell their oil or their commodities for yuan? Do they want to be part of the Belt Road? Do they want to be part of the BRICS? These are things that I think are coming more into focus as we see the United States flex its muscle. And I don't think everyone across the globe agrees with it.
Silver just crossed a line the paper market was never designed to handle. Rick Rule points to a single political shift that changed everything: silver being classified as a critical mineral, while delivery demands exploded at the same time. Today, there are roughly 2 billion ounces of paper contracts backed by barely 140 million ounces of floating metal. And for the first time, powerful players are actually standing for delivery. That's why this isn't just another silver rally. It's a structural break. Rick Rule explains how repeated delivery requests, national-level accumulation, and shrinking available supply are quietly severing silver from the LBMA-style paper system, and why once confidence breaks, price becomes the least important variable.
And you know what? One of the best things about the United States is that the sovereignty of the states provides you with a lot of options. You were in Minnesota, you've moved to Florida and experienced a culturally different place, politically different place as a consequence inside the federal borders, but, novel in very many ways. We have a community of mining and metals investors at thecommodityuniversity.com. And anybody who's looking to build a competitive advantage as a mining or a metals investor, I encourage you to check it out. We have course drops every month, monthly mastermind sessions, and daily WhatsApp groups where we talk about what we're buying and why. And I like to give them a couple questions here. And they knew you were coming on, Andy.
Sure.
They're big fans of yours.
Thank you.
And you mentioned silver, so I want to get into some of their questions about the silver market. And let's start here. Based on what you're seeing from a purchase standpoint, What is the primary driver of silver today? Is it still sort of equal parts monetary and industrial, or are you seeing one take over and begin to be the main driver of silver price?
I think it's much bigger than. I think it's at the highest level. I mean, the U.S. government has classified it a critical mineral. The European Union did at the end of 23. China said in November they're going to prioritize their silver for domestic needs. And then a month later, in response, or 2 months later, in response to us saying it's critical, well, we're going to limit exports. You have the LBMA, which, according to David Jensen, which is someone that I think you should have on your show, he's fantastic, who says there's 2 billion ounces of contracts that are outstanding that are deliverable contracts against 140 million ounce float. And he questions even that amount. In other words, those 140 million ounces have obligations of 2 billion ounces that they're backing. What could possibly go wrong? You're seeing every single month for the past 15 months since Trump won the election. I'm not kidding. Every month, millions and millions and millions and millions of ounces every month. Billions and billions and billions of dollars. And really, what more do you need to know other than who the hell's doing this? Who is bringing in billions upon billions? And at that level, when you're talking that kind of money, these people don't do things just for the hell of it. They know where things are going. They are friends of or are the folks that make the rules or write the playbook. And when you see a market where 8 Western banks, 1 or 2 in Canada, 4 or 5 in the US, and 1 or 2 or 3 in Europe have controlled the largest short position on COMEX of any commodity ever traded in the history of the market, over 1,000 commodities, that's now breaking. It's breaking because these commodities all have delivery, these contracts have delivery features that no one ever did, less than 1%. Nobody did. And it was a market to hedge or to speculate. We use it. If I have 3 million ounces in my warehouse, I'll sell 3 million ounces on paper. So I'm market neutral with my inventory. But what it has turned into is something far more than that. And it has given the ability of the West to suppress gold and silver. And I would argue silver, because of the military industrial complex, the amount of silver that is needed in high-tech weapons. Go to silverwars.com and read what they say about all of the military uses of silver. And then look at gold. And it's a term called Gibson's paradox that speaks to the inverse relationship between real interest rates and gold. So the West wants to suppress interest rates. They got to step on gold. No one ever stood for delivery, but it started in the global South. It started in 2020, where all of a sudden we started to see huge deliveries and repatriation of gold and silver by central banks and by very large purchasers. It's now accelerating. And when you have, just like Bernie Madoff, everyone was happy with the monthly checks they were getting until people said, you know what, I need my principal back. That's what's happening on the LBMA. That's what's happening on COMEX. You're seeing far more deliveries than there are bars, or far more delivery requests than there are bars to handle it, far more paper contracts than there are bars standing behind it. That is what is fundamentally different. And I think that's all you need to know is who the hell is standing for delivery for billions and billions and billions and billions and billions in silver. The U.S. government just put a national strategic national security policy floor underneath the price of silver. The public has just begun to wake up, but really hardly at all. They're just beginning to. Not the people watching this this has been common knowledge forever. So this isn't being driven by the retail public. This is being driven by the most well-funded and, far more important, the most well-informed traders on the planet. And they see something very clearly that is allowing them to spend hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to bring all this stuff in. They don't do it for the hell of it.
Now, what was I'm sure you've commented on this a ton, but right before the holidays, we saw this 10% rush, 10% drop in the silver price. What was your perspective on that event, Andy?
Well, I think it was what's called shaking the bushes. So going back to who's standing for delivery, these people do not use margin at all. These are at the low end of it, it would be Tesla and Samsung and Sony. And Samsung supposedly just went to Mexico and opened up a mine that had been shut to buy all their Dorian concentrate. As a side note, China's been doing that for 2 years. I've talked to Sean Kuhn and talked about this forever. Dolly Varden. He said, yeah, China's coming and buying Dorian concentrate right from the miners, have been for the last 2 years, paying double what the West will and shipping it back and refining it there. So the big players who are standing for delivery, they don't give a crap about margin. And that's the textbook for the CME group, the COMEX. Whenever there's too many longs that are threatening the shorts, they raise margins. But, you know, I went to lunch with one of the owners of a professional baseball team 2 weeks ago, and he lives not too far from me in Florida in a neighborhood that I've never seen anything like it. And Mark Wahlberg is his neighbor, just moved in, and Alicia Keys down the street. These houses are $50 million. You think they use mortgages, or do they come in and pay cash? If rates on mortgages go way up, is it going to affect that neighborhood? No, but it will affect everyone else's neighborhood. So let's look at what they did. On Christmas Day, you needed $21,000 in your account, in your margin account, to control one 5,000 ounce silver contract, and say silver was $60 then, $300,000. 21,000 controls 300,000. So you get all these traders that say, you know, and maybe they're well heeled, maybe they have 10 million bucks, and they say, you know, look, man, we can get rich. Those prices going to the moon. Let's go deep into margin. We'll buy all these contracts because we only need 21,000 in our margin account. So they do that. The next day, the CME group says you now need $27,000 in your margin account, raise it by 30%. So all of those contracts, if they didn't have the liquidity to put it in, they had to sell contracts to come up with the margin, which drives the price down further. Selling begets selling. The rise in margin and the selling begets more selling. Who comes in and scoops it all up on the cheap? Oh yeah, the big boys and girls that are standing for delivery for billions and billions and billions and billions and billions every month. They laugh. They laugh. If you think you can play in this sandbox, your checkbook's not as big as ours. You may drive a Ferrari and have 3 houses, but it ain't as big as ours. So we're going to shake those bushes as much as we can. And anyone on margin's got to cough it up or get out. And so all of that drove the price down, and look at it today. It's at an all-time high again today. It's just shaking the bushes. Didn't change anything fundamentally. And that's really what's different about the deliveries. Is that in 2011, when they did this, they broke its neck and it never came back. It did not come back for 20 years almost, or 15 years, right? But now, whoever is standing for delivery looks at that as a gift, because all it is a leverage event where they deleverage the weak hands, and they come in and scoop it up, because what did not happen was all of a sudden, a big rush of supply into the market. That didn't happen. Nothing fundamentally changed, but the traders that were on leverage, well, they got had, and they got shook from the bushes to the delight of the big money, who says, thank you very much for the $10 drop in the price of silver. Appreciate it.
So this would be the equivalent as a bunch of homeowners who have 20% equity in their homes. And that's normal. They feel comfortable there. But overnight, the bank sends out a memo and says, actually, we're a little uncomfortable with the market. We need you to have 50% equity in your home. So either come up with the cash
by tomorrow,
or sell the house.
And then BlackRock comes in and buys the whole neighborhood.
Because most people can't come up with that cash. They have to hit the bid on the house. A bunch of supply hits the market, dropping price, and some savvy investor who saw this coming, was maybe instrumental in the orchestration of it, swoops in to buy that supply. It's
100%. That is exactly what happened, in my mind anyway.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you for that. And you just referenced 2011. This is what happened, and it broke the neck. Similar scenario, Andy, in 2011. I mean, this is interesting. That's right when I got in the business. So what was the scenario at that point in the silver market that you were referring to there?
Well, the price got driven up to $50, and it was and it was a very different time, right? We didn't see contracts standing for delivery. That didn't start happening until 2020. At that point, 1% of contracts were standing for delivery, and the countries like China and Russia and India weren't taking delivery off of the LBMA the way they are right now, and you didn't have the same environment. We still had, that moral high ground. We still had dollar supremacy. We still had all of the stuff that the United States was all about, right, in 2011. And so it was a situation that ended very abruptly and very quickly by raising margins. But now you're dealing, instead of sophisticated, savvy investors, you're dealing with nation states, in my mind. That's the real big difference, is that you have a whole world of big money that does not want to hold their wealth in U.S. treasuries anymore. I mean, imagine if you have $1 billion. Where do you put your money throughout the last 30, 40 years? You put it in treasuries. because that's the safest, most liquid place. You're not going to put it in the stock market, which has volatility. You're not going to put it into, I mean, you might buy a bunch of real estate, sure, but that excess cash would go into U.S. treasuries. And that's where all that money went before. And now that money that has left U.S. treasuries is looking for a safe place to put it. Well, you have a tier one asset that has no counterparty risk, that has doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury over the last 25 years. And look at it the last few years. Last year, gold's up 40%, the treasury's up 4.5%. And they had just got done, sanctioning Russia and confiscating theirs. This last year, gold's up 80%, 10-year treasury up 4%. That's 20 times. So the point of it is there's no counterparty risk. It outperforms it. I think that is the difference, is that you have countries that are saying, we have enough money, you can't do that to us. You can do that to a hedge fund or to some traders, go for it. Try doing it to the People's Bank of China, or try doing it and a sovereign-based hedge fund that works on their behalf, or try doing it to Saudi Arabia or to India. Any of these big countries have pocketbooks and checkbooks and intellect and coordination and motivation and sophistication that they didn't have, or the desire to challenge the West. And this is the way to do it, to challenge the West in a very docile way, if you will. And you don't need to fire missiles and bring your warships to the coast of New York to threaten the U.S. You just need to create an event where you get one of these massive banks to failure to deliver. And I think that's what's happening also right now with the European banks, because they're the ones supposedly on the hook. Now, that's Tom Luongo's theory. But if you look at a report that just came out of the Economic Times, they claim that JP Morgan has flip-flopped and has went long, has covered a 200 million ounce short position in silver, bought 21 million ounces over the last 6 weeks of physical. And largely they and the rest of the U.S. banks, the big five, are long, leaving one or two of the banks in your neck of the woods and a couple in Europe massively short. So as the price goes up, who is getting squeezed on this? This is a very different deal than it was in 2011. This is about national sovereignty. And when you have the European Union, the United States, and China effectively say that we are rushing to accumulate this stuff and classifying things as critical and openly using it, like the BRICS are, as a settlement vehicle instead of treasuries, in other words, use gold to settle imbalances in trade and in currency, that's part of the M Bridge. That's part of what they're doing with the expansion of the Shanghai Metals Exchange. They're opening vaults all throughout the Belt Road. The first one was built in Hong Kong, where if gold leaves China, has to come out of Hong Kong. Well, the way they're doing it is they're trading their digital yuan over the SIPs or the M Bridge to a country like Saudi Arabia, getting their oil, and that digital yuan is now immediately convertible into gold off the Shanghai Gold Exchange in Hong Kong without converting to dollars. Guess where the second exchange is being built? Saudi Arabia. And they plan on doing multi-jurisdictional vaults all throughout the Belt Road, creating a system where you trade in local currencies, settle imbalances in gold. Gold is being integrated into the monetary system globally, and silver's is flat out critical for a world that is advanced. And I think they are prioritizing that now. And that is what's different, is that now it's not as big of a secret to the people who are pulling the strings as it once was. And these countries are significant enough in wealth and in sophistication to challenge this hegemony that where no one stood for delivery. And if you do, you break the system. And that's starting to happen right now.
That's fascinating. Can I ask you, Andy, and I know we're getting to the top of the hour here, but what vulnerabilities would you see in these Chinese-driven initiatives and the emergence of the new regional hegemony and the threat to the United States? Like, do you see any vulnerabilities, any reasons to think that the consensus China thesis might be wrong, that this dragon's going to continue to grow and acquire allies and trade routes through the Belt and Road investments and a larger percent of global trade in yuan or yuan adjacent currencies? And anything in there, any fracture lines, Andy, that you see?
I mean, look, I'm not an expert on China, but I see what they're doing and their expansion in the Belt Road, which is the largest infrastructure project in human history. It's not perfect, but they are doing things that are cooperative. We will come into your country, which is underdeveloped and resource rich, and we will help bring you into, into the current century, if you will, from a standpoint of building your middle class, building your infrastructure. We'll build roads and bridges and maritime channels. We'll build mines and oil refineries, and we will help you, industrialize your country and become wealthy. And for it, we want a little piece, and we'll do it in a cooperative manner. I think it is better than going in and threatening countries with military action. And, it's not perfect, but that's why I think these actions that are being made by the U.S. Are really detrimental to U.S. hegemony and plays right into the hands of the countries that are now joining together. One of the big things that people who are very dollar bullish are missing is a comment that came out of the Russian minister Sergei Glaziev, and he said a couple things. He said, and everyone says, well, the BRICS isn't big enough, and there's the milkshake theory and all this stuff. I get it. But he said, we are opening up our bridge technology to everyone in the world with the exception of the European Union, Great Britain, and the United States. So in other words, you're talking the entire Belt Road Initiative. It is being integrated into right now, where countries will trade back and forth with one another, building their own monetary ecosystems, using their own local currencies, settling imbalances in gold in a series of multi-jurisdictional vaults. And I was listening to the guy that developed BRICS Pay. BRICS Pay is a B2B. So BRICS Bridge is central bank to central bank. BRICS Bridge is like your B2B or consumer to business, and you live in Brazil and you want to go to China, you have an app and it just bangs seamlessly, bang, 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 you buy stuff. And that is right now, he said, we're in China right now negotiating to roll that into the Belt Road Initiative. So you take the Belt Road, you take all of these countries that are going to stop or have alternatives to dollar settlement, and the ability to build their own ecosystem, and the ability to join with what amounts to 90% of human population. It's something that should seriously be taken very seriously. And I think the problem is that many people, you see, the Chinese think in terms of decades. We think in terms of seconds. And that is the instant gratification that this world has in the West has instantly became, where if your investments don't go triple digit in a year, they suck. And I want it now, and that's not fast enough. And everything is about immediacy, and they don't have the patience to be able to deal with the little by little, and therefore they dismiss it, they poo-poo it. And right underneath our noses, they are building a very formidable infrastructure where they already control the majority of all the natural resources, the majority of the manufacturing, the majority of all of the refining, and growing into what amounts to, if you add in the Belt Road Initiative, if you add in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union, 90% of human population, which is now going to have access to this new settlement system, both from a central bank to central bank and from B2B. Little by little, it chips away not only at the settlement status of the dollar, but more so at the reserve status of the dollar, as all of these countries do not want to hold treasuries anymore because of the risk of sanctions, because of the military risk, because of the irresponsibility. Why would you want to sell your oil to a country where the dollar is being wickedly devalued through fiscal irresponsibility? And the metrics that they use to tell you how much inflation and how much money creation are completely fugazi, right? They don't even publish M3 anymore, and they said it was archaic, but that's the broadest measure of the money supply. And the CPI the CPI should be called the CPI. John Williams of Shadow Stats would say it's 11%, not 3. So all of these things that we are doing, on top of the way we're going around the world doing all of this stuff, I think only reinforces the likelihood that they're not going to hit a roadblock. Look, they're not perfect, but I think, and everyone says, who will trust China? It's not about who will trust China. Everything that they are doing is based upon transparency, based upon gold, based upon using your own currency over a network that isn't going to be interfered with by the SWIFT. So I would say there's a 60, 70% chance that there isn't something that derails them. But is it fast enough for the people who analyze this stuff to agree with it, or do we just get blindsided by it someday? I don't know. I guess that's the question, because we get no credible newsworthy anything from the mainstream. It's people like me who sit and either too stupid to say it or have the courage to say it because I believe it. We'll see what happens. I've been doing that for 5 years, and a lot of it's come true. I'm not happy about that either. It's frightening. I got 3 kids, but they're growing up in a world where the dollar is not really looked upon, or is this country looked upon the way it once was. Hopefully we get our act in order, or else things will change. And that's just the way the world works.
Silver didn't break away from the paper system overnight. It was pushed out by policy, delivery pressure, and math the system can't reconcile. When a metal is labeled critical, when billions of ounces are promised on paper against a fraction of real supply, and when large players demand delivery instead of rollover, the rules quietly change. This isn't about price spikes or headlines, it's about structure, and once structure fails, markets don't revert. Now that you understand why silver is separating from the LBMA-style paper trade, the next thing you need to understand is what this break forces next. And that's exactly what the next video on this channel breaks down.